Okay, so yeah, so that's can you do that with like let's say you're Sunday school, you're at Daniel 9:27, and he shall
Sure.
confirm the covenant of money for 1 week. Can you kind of run us through that briefly?
Yeah,
How
yeah.
do you expose it as
Let's
it is
do
on
it.
the screen there?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have there in verse 26, here's the famous prophecy. It says, and after 62 weeks, 62 weeks, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Let's see. And it says, verse 25 gives you that other one, right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So verse 25, let's start there. Know therefore
sure.
and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem, you can argue if that's Cyrus or Nehemiah or all that stuff, but that's another subject for another time. That commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince, that's Jesus Christ, shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Okay, so that's where you get the 69 weeks. 69 times 7, what is that? I don't have a calculator in front of me.
483.
483, that's 483 years, okay? So he's giving you a time period, 483 years. And he says, during this time period, the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. And it looks like that's referring to Nehemiah and Ezra and all that stuff. Verse 26, and after 62 weeks, now it's taken for granted that we already had the 7 weeks already. Okay, so essentially after 62 weeks and 7 weeks, because we had that in verse 25. I don't mean to be confusing, but these are technicalities that we should know. So essentially after 69 weeks, shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Okay, so cut off is the word that has to do with being killed or dying, and he dies not for himself. He died for the sins of the world, and died for my sins. He died for your sins. And the people of the prince, now that's a small p, so I would interpret that prince there as more than likely the Antichrist. I don't have a problem with that. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, that's Jerusalem and the temple, and the end thereof. Now that phrase, the end, is generally connected to tribulation, second advent, things like that. The end thereof shall be with a flood. The flood is not literal water. I don't believe it's a metaphor that's used throughout the Bible regularly to represent an army overflowing a city. The end thereof shall be with a flood, essentially an army attacking the city. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. So these desolations of Jerusalem are predetermined by God through prophecy. We know throughout the book of Daniel and Revelation that Jerusalem is going to be attacked and go through great tribulation, all right, and be destroyed by the Antichrist and all kinds of problems. Anyway, verse 27. So now we get to verse 27. It says, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Okay, so that 1 week is going to be 7 years. All right. The big question is, who is the he in verse 27? And who is who is the he referring to? Well, you got to go back to verse 26. Now, in verse 26, you have two characters. You have Messiah the Prince, and you also have just the Prince, small p. So you've got Messiah, and then you've got this Prince that shall come. So technically, verse 27 could refer to either one of them. That would be fine. Most people have interpreted verse 27 as a reference to the prince that shall come, the Antichrist. So the general understanding is verse 27, and the Antichrist shall confirm the covenant. What covenant? Well, some kind of peace covenant with many, the Jews, for 7 years. He's going to make a 7-year peace agreement with the nation of Israel. And in the midst of the week, he, the Antichrist, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate, the temple, even until the consummation or the end of the tribulation period. And that determined, the desolations, which are determined, shall be poured upon the desolate, the Jews. All right, so that's usually the interpretation. Verse 27 is the Antichrist. I would interpret it this way. And he, referring to Messiah, the Messiah, shall confirm the covenant.
Let me put that in yellow, just like the he, so people can make the connection.
Yep.
With the color coding, the way you're reading it. Okay.
Absolutely. And he, the Messiah, shall confirm the covenant with many, that'd be the Jewish people, for 1 week. The idea is for 7 years, because when he confirms the covenant, there's at that moment, there are 7 years of Daniel's 70th week left. So he confirms the covenant for 1 week. And in the midst of the week, okay, 3.5 years later, he, the Messiah, Jesus, shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. Okay, well, how did Jesus cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease? And then it says, and for the overspreading of abominations, he, the Messiah, Jesus, shall make it desolate. Make what desolate? I would say make the temple, the sanctuary, desolate. Now, you say, well, how did Jesus cause the sacrifice to cease? How did Jesus cause the temple to be desolate? Well, I would argue that his death on the cross made the sacrifice at the brazen altar obsolete, because even though Jerusalem existed for another 37 years up until the invasion of the Romans and the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, and they sacrificed sacrifices on the brazen altar, up until the destruction of Jerusalem, after the death of Jesus Christ, does God the Father recognize those lamb sacrifices on the altar? After Jesus died on the cross and the veil of the temple was rent in twain, showing that there's entrance now into the most holy place, what's the use of the brazen altar? God's not going to accept the blood of lambs and goats when he's already accepted the blood of his own son. So in that respect, I would argue that Jesus made the oblation to cease. The sacrifice and the oblation is not accepted by the Father anymore. The only blood that God the Father accepts at this point is the blood of his son that was shed for sins. And then for the overspreading of abominations. Now, I would argue that this passage is a little different than the three other mentions that refer to a sacrifice being taken away and an abomination of desolation. And we can get into that later if you want.
Sorry, which passage, Brother Matt?
Sure. So Daniel 8:11 talks about the sacrifice being taken away and the abomination of desolation.
Right.
Or abomination of desolation. Let's see, where is it?
Yeah.
All right. There you got the daily sacrifice taken away, the place of his sanctuary cast down,
right.
The transgression of desolation in 8:13. And then you have in Daniel 11:31, you have it talking about, I believe it's a historical reference to Antiochus Epiphanes taking away the daily sacrifice, right? And they place the abomination that maketh desolate. Historically, Antiochus set up the idol of Zeus on the brazen altar. And then you have in Daniel 12:11, it says, and from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be, 1,290 days. So you have these four texts in the book of Daniel that are relatively similar. Three of them are very similar. One of them is kind of similar. Daniel 9:27 is a little bit different from those three other verses. The wording is different. And as King James Bible believers, I think that that's significant. And I think we would all agree that the wording is significant. In Daniel 9:27, it doesn't say that the sacrifice is taken away. In Daniel 9:27, it says that it's made to cease. And then in Daniel 9:27, it doesn't talk about an abomination of desolation. It talks about the overspreading of abominations, plural. He shall make it desolate. So I start looking at these things and I start wondering, well, why is it worded that way? Why are there these differences here? And so I started just when I first began to look into this, and I'm not the first one, by the way, to come up with this theory about Daniel 9:27 referring to Jesus. I've actually got a screenshot or a printout picture. I might even have it right here somewhere of a I think it's a Waldensian, no, not a Waldensian Bible. It's a Bible from the Netherlands in the 1600s. And in the margin of this Dutch Bible, it has a note that says, Jesus Christ confirms the covenant with many for 1 week. And it interprets this verse exactly as I'm saying it. And that's back from 1637.
Well, yeah, actually, those guys would be the closest to us, so it's useful to show them. But most Christianity actually would identify that he as the Messiah, not the Antichrist.
Is that right? Okay. Yes. Well, most of the books I'm familiar with, as far as maybe in the last 100 or 200 years with Clarence Larkin and Dr. Ruckman, I've always heard verse 27.
Yes, but beyond that sphere, like all the Presbyterians, all the preterists, all the historicists have always understood that he as being the Christ. Now, to be clear, I disagree. I think that is the Antichrist, but you are definitely not in the minority when it comes to that. And let me say this: just because your view matches the historicist and preterist view does not automatically disqualify it either.
Absolutely. Yeah, because I'm absolutely not a preterist.
No, right. Yeah.
So,
I know you're not, and I'm making that clear to the people listening.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out.
Sometimes, by association, people will just drop the argument and not look further into it. But
Absolutely.
I mean, like, we're not going to drop the Trinity just because the Roman Catholic Church believes the Trinity.
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciate you pointing that out, because that's a very good point. So I'm not sure how they go through the details of this verse, but that would be interesting. I would be interested to find out how they go through all the details. But anyway, the overspreading of abominations, plural. The abominations, I believe, are what Jesus listed out in Matthew 23 of the Pharisees, the rulers of Jerusalem that were responsible for receiving their Messiah and influencing the nation. They were doing all kinds of things that Jesus railed on them for in Matthew chapter 23 and just blew them out of the water. Those were all their abominations, and it was because of those things in the end of Matthew chapter 23, Jesus makes the comment in reference to their temple. He says in Matthew chapter 23, and I think this is very key, he says in Matthew 23, verse 38, at the end of his blast on the Pharisees, he says, "Behold, your house is left unto you desolate," which is important because previous to that, Jesus had been in the temple and had said it was his Father's house. "Make not my Father's house a den of thieves." But now he's calling the temple your house. Why is it all of a sudden their house? Well, because the Spirit of God has departed from it. It's desolate. What does desolate mean? It's empty. Jesus didn't tear down the walls or throw a stick of dynamite in there. How is the house left unto you desolate? How is the house left unto the Jews desolate? The only explanation is that he authorized the Spirit of God to depart, and being one with his Father, that's obviously not a problem. But he says basically at that moment, Matthew 23:38, the temple became desolate of the Spirit of God, and it was just an empty shell of a building at that point. All right, so for the overspreading of the Pharisees' abominations, Jesus made the temple desolate, and it's going to remain desolate until the consummation. It's going to remain desolate until the end of Daniel's 70th week, which amounts to the second advent, when Jesus returns and rebuilds the temple, and the Spirit of God is inhabited in that temple, or Jesus himself being in that temple, whatever. But the temple, even if the Jews rebuild the temple tomorrow on the Dome of the Rock or wherever, in the city of David, the Spirit of God is not going to be in that temple. When the Antichrist enters into the temple and sits on the mercy seat and says, "I am God," as prophesied in 2 Thessalonians 2, the Spirit of God is not in that temple. He's not driving out the Spirit of God or anything like that. The Spirit of God does not return to that building until Jesus rebuilds the temple in the millennium. All right. And so that which is determined, the tribulation, the punishment, the chastisement for the Jews' sins, will be poured upon them, upon the desolate. The Jews are the desolate. So anyway, that would be my synopsis of that text. More details are given in my book, and I lay it out as best I can. But that is essentially, in a nutshell, my position. So go now, wherever you want to go with that is totally fine. For the record, for what it's worth, I did not prepare for this this meeting, so I'll do my best to answer your questions. But wherever you want to go, let's do it.
Yeah, no worries. I'm not I'm probably the same level of preparation as you, and don't worry. And like you said, you've got your book written for anybody that wants. I will be putting the links, forgive me, to the books also in below the video, so you can go check them out. Also, Brother Matt Crane's books. So you said, Brother Matt, there's 4 similar passages that talk about the same, or seem to talk about the same kind of thing in Daniel. So I'm gonna put them up on the screen. Basically, I'm studying along. This is for me like a Bible study time,
Yeah,
so we're not
absolutely.
necessarily here. We're not doing those videos necessarily for the clicks and for the debates and for the sensationalism. Sure. I'm interested. I want to learn, and I believe the people who are listening also want to learn. I got no problem adjusting my view, but when I read Daniel 9:27, and as you mentioned, it seems parallel in almost every point to the other 3 passages. and I'm a King James Bible believer also, and I believe wording is important.
Mhm.
I also believe this. I think, you know how at one point Jehoiada the son of Benaiah the son of Jehoiada used the Egyptian staff against him and killed him with it,
Mhm.
with his own spear. I think the devil can do that to us too. So one thing that was very important from the, not that this will end us getting killed. This is, let's be clear, this is doctrine, and you can differ on doctrine. This is prophecy, right? And nobody here is a heretic, okay?
No,
You know?
exactly.
So, and for those of you who say this is not that important, well, let's say it's not. It's a hobby for us, and we enjoy talking about the Bible. So it's better than a lot of other hobbies.
Yeah,
But I think this stuff is fascinating, you know?
me too.
Okay, so one thing is I learned from Dr. Ruckman is to really pay attention to differences in wording, that these things are important. Okay, and that's been tremendous in my life. It really brought to light a lot of Bible passages. I think at the same time that could be pushed to an extreme where differences in wording, we fall into a rut where we're optimizing for differences in our interpretation. On the other hand of that scale is you've got people who, well, it's all the same thing. There's no difference at all. You know, it's always the same. It's just a different way of saying things. And I think both extremes are kind of are wrong. I mean, like the hyper dispensationalists, God bless their hearts, mid-acts, whatever you want to call them, they'll take baptized by the Spirit, baptized with the Spirit, and say, well, there are differences in wording, so they're not the same baptism. But then Paul in Ephesians 1, Ephesians 4 says with and by relative to the sealing of the Holy Spirit. So I'm careful of differences in wording, but I'm also careful not to always optimize for the difference in wording in my interpretation.
Yeah.
So when I look at these here, so let's read them. This is also on the left side there of the column. This is Daniel 8, and then Daniel 9 on the second column, Daniel 11 in the third, Daniel 12 in the fourth. And Daniel 8, yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And I got no problem with taking away. When you see something, when you take it away, the result is the same. There's many Bible passages that talk about the same event in different wording. Just compare Kings and Chronicles, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 12, and an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. So here's sacrifice. I don't know if I can highlight this in yellow. Can I put this in yellow? Should allow me to put this in. Okay, so there's yellow, and there's a sacrifice there.
Yep.
So I'm going with you as the way I'm doing my Bible study, right? I'm studying my Bible, and there's a sacrifice there, and there's a sacrifice there. Granted, I'm not saying that's automatically what it is, but I'm noting these things.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Sure. Okay. So the daily sacrifice is taken away. Let me put that in green. And there is the sacrifice being caused to cease. That's in green. Take away. This is in Daniel chapter 11.
Mm-hmm.
Taken away. There's in Daniel chapter 12.
Yep.
And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice, and I put that in yellow too, by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. Of course, the Antichrist. I think we agree, right? That's the Antichrist in Daniel 8. Correct?
Yes. Yeah, I would agree with you there.
Okay. Then I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint who spake, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice? Now, Daniel chapter 9 is also a vision, so I don't have it on the screen there to color coded, but it's also a vision. And the transgression of desolation. So if I look in Daniel chapter 9, there's desolation in chapter 8. So let me put that in turquoise, and there's the temple. I believe it's a temple being, and you kind of alluded to that, your house is left unto you desolate, right? So right. There's desolation. There's desolate here in chapter 11 in turquoise, and there's the abomination that maketh desolate. There it is in turquoise. If to go on middle of verse 13, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. There's a treading. Now I'm not saying it's necessarily the same thing, but I've got cross references, a whole bunch of them in Isaiah, with the treading and the overspreading of the scourge. there's abominations. Does it say abominations in chapter 8?
It says transgression of desolation. I'm thinking that one.
Transgression of desolation. Okay, it doesn't say abomination in chapter 8, right? If I'm wrong. Am I missing it? This is cool. I'm gonna this be part of my notes after.
It's in 8:13. It says, "And the transgression of desolation." You have desolation in blue, and then transgression is right before it. There you go.
Okay, right. The transgression of desolation, whereas we have abomination that maketh desolate.
Yeah.
Right. So let's put that in dark blue. Sorry, guys. I know it's hard to see, but that's what happens sometimes. And he said unto me, 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary shall be cleansed. This is 2,300, starting from the resumption of the daily sacrifice, not necessarily from the resumption of the decree to rebuild. It's not, the 2,300 days are not being calculated from when the covenant is confirmed. They're being calculated from when the daily sacrifice resumes. And there's a difference between the two dates, because Cyrus gives the proclamation on one date, but it's only 7 months later that the first daily sacrifice is resumed by Zerubbabel in Ezra chapter 3. Mm-hmm. So I'm looking at that, and I'm sure I've missed, if I pay more attention, here, there's another one. I'm sure if I pay more attention, I'll get some more of these. But it would take me personally a lot to overcome the connection, and the similarity between, especially that's kind of almost one continuous vision between those passages. Can you see how that would be kind of hard?
Oh yeah, no, definitely. I totally understand the difficulty to surmount that. One quick thing that I would throw out, that I would argue, is that these texts are other than Daniel 11:31. I think, in my opinion, Daniel 11:31 is a reference to Antiochus Epiphanes that did something that is a type of what the Antichrist will do in the future. But that's neither here nor there. These texts mostly refer to the Antichrist and something that the Antichrist will do. The Antichrist is a counterfeit and counterfeits almost everything that Jesus does. The devil is always trying to mimic Jesus. And so I think part of the reason why what the Antichrist is going to do in the future is a counterfeit of what Jesus himself did in Daniel 9:27. And that's why they're so similar. I would throw that caveat out there. But again, that's just one.
Well, so that's a good point, and I believe that. And can I not take that and say that's exactly what's going on in Daniel 9:27? Since the Lord Jesus Christ made the one sacrifice for sins forever, Hebrews chapter 10, the Antichrist will walk into the temple and say, you don't need any more sacrifices. So that's also in line with what you're saying.
Yeah, an interesting perspective.
Okay.